93.3 Philadelphia, a radio.com station. Now, live from the Malamut and Associates Law Studios, this is Jeff Bolton.
Hey, it's Jeff with you here on 1210 WPHT. Sure glad you've joined us on an absolute scorcher of an afternoon in Philadelphia, man. It is the real deal out there right now. Feels like it's 97, but it actually feels like 107. I mean, it is a bear out there right now. And I tell you that again. I'm not trying to dad you here, but man, check on your old people, check on your young people. It is rough out there today, just because of this incredibly oppressive heat. People can suffocate in this stuff. So do keep that in mind and stay safe. Well, we've got a big issue that's happening right now, and that is that there was a move, of course, several weeks ago, where the Iranians did some things, shot down one of our drones, and President Trump was apparently ready to go after them and to retaliate in some capacity. But according to a number of media reports, he decided not to do that. He elected not to go after them, not to retaliate. It is said, again, we don't really know this, but it is said that was because there was it was going to be what they called a disproportionate response, where, to put that in perspective, they shoot down a drone, of course, which is a mechanical object without any people, right? And in the response that we apparently had come up with, and again, nobody really fully understands if this is true or not, but what was going to happen was that the response that we were going to, execute or prosecute on them was going to be, or was going to result in the potential death of some significant number of Iranian people. Don't know if those would have been soldiers, don't know if they would have been civilians, but the president decided not to retaliate for the shoot down of the drone. So what happens instead then is that the Iranians get more aggressive, and they decide then that they are going to hijack a British tanker. They had already been accused by the United States and others of blowing up a tanker. They didn't do it successfully. They caused a couple of explosions near a tanker with mines a couple of weeks ago. The tanker kept going and it ended up being okay. Well, the Iranians escalate this, and over the last couple of days, they seized one British-flagged tanker. They basically did what you see, if our special forces people do. They rappelled down from a helicopter onto this tanker, made it turn. So it's now, for the moment at least, the property of the Iranian government. Then they seized another tanker, which they have apparently released already. We don't know precisely what all those details are, but basically what the Iranians do is they take really small vessels, they get around bigger ships, they harass them, and then in this case, they put some commando-type dudes from a helicopter onto the deck of the British tanker, and they don't repel them. The Brits, that is, don't repel the boarders. Now, I understand as a commercial, what a seaman, for lack of a better description, why you wouldn't necessarily fight back. I get that. If you don't have the tools and the training and the firepower, then you don't necessarily fight back. They had their reasons, I'm sure. For whatever reason, there was not a British military escort at the time. That for sure has caused a whole bunch of wagging tails in Great Britain, as you might imagine. But what's clear now is that the Iranians have been emboldened to take these actions, and there's no way that the Western world is going to allow that. Not just the United States, but the UK and Western allies are not going to allow the Iranians to seize shipping in the so-called Strait of Hormuz, which, for those of you that know your geography, is a choke point that leads into the Persian Gulf. I've asked my friend Colonel John Antal to join us. He's our go-to guy here at WPHT when we have these kinds of issues. I don't know if it happens to be when I'm on the air that this stuff happens to. I don't know. I don't know exactly how it happens. All I know is, sir, somehow, every time I'm on the air, it seems like you are lately too. This is a big deal.
Well, Jeff, it's an honor to be on your show, and to all your listeners out there, I think we all need to take a deep breath and understand there's not going to be a war anytime soon unless the Iranians do something egregious, really go out of their way to kill Americans. I mean, one of the things that's going on here now is international politics on a very high tension level, but nonetheless, it's politics. And remember that a great German philosopher once said that war is nothing more than politics by another means. Well, today what we're seeing is politics being played out with military might, but nonetheless staying beneath the threshold of war. So what the Iranians are trying to do is they are hurting badly because what they've been doing is funding terrorism and expansion of a new Iranian empire in that area, and it's been causing all sorts of problems with our allies there. So we're trying to stop them. Never forget that the Iranians killed over 600, maybe even 1,000 American soldiers and wounded many, many more in the war we had in Iraq because the Iranians supplied not only weapons to the Iraqi insurgents, but also helped them with tactics and advisors and some other things. So the Iranians are not our friends, but we do not want to go to war against Iran. And in this struggle right now in the world for trying to stop people from fighting wars, America is playing a dampening effect. And what you're seeing in the White House is really interesting. It's part theater, and it's part very strong, realpolitik, clear-eyed determination of how to stop fighting. Now, one of the things President Trump has is on his staff, he's got John Bolton, he's got other folks who are very much saying one thing, and they're saying, oh, we ought to go get them. And then the president's pulling them back. So they're playing a really interesting game of good cop, bad cop. And I assure you, this is part of the strategy.
Colonel John Antal is with us as a guest here as we discuss what's happening in the Middle East right now. It's heating up again. Many of you know from the time that he spent with us before, he had an illustrious Army career as a tanker and served up at high national levels in our government. He now has a website that I direct you all to because there you can buy his books. It's American put the dash in there, leadership.com. It's American-leadership.com. And what he does is writes books. For example, 7 leadership lessons of the American Revolution, which we've talked about before, 7 leadership lessons of D-Day. These books are fantastic reads and really tremendous training aids, too, if you ever have to train, coach, or mentor anyone, whether that's in your business or young people or whatever. And so we pull him in because he is both a historian and a combat soldier with a keen eye for these sorts of things. So we're going to get down into the guts of this here in a moment. I want to get us to a quick break with, again, this admonishment and reminder. It feels like 107 degrees in Philly today. So be extremely careful. The temp is only 97. We sit, of course, in our studio, air-conditioned and sassy, but it is really, really rough out there. So check on your old people, check on your young people who are really susceptible to a bunch of really bad stuff in this kind of environment. So we'll jump back next into this question. Is it worth going to war with the Iranians over the seizing, a shoot down of a drone, the seizing of a British tanker, and, of course, why do they go after the Brits and not the Americans? I think we all know that answer, but Colonel Antal will help us figure it out next, right here on 1210 WPHT. Hey, it's Jeff with you here on 1210 WPHT. Colonel John Antal is with us as we look about at the situation in the Middle East, which is heating up again. You note Colonel Antal is saying with great clarity this is certainly does not rise to the level of going to war, and in fact the messaging and the action of the president has been thoughtful. It's been cautious. We're not attempting, at least from what I can see, we are not attempting to press our will on people militarily, as we have been wont to do over the last 20 years in the whack-a-mole of terrorism. And Colonel Antal, when I look at what's happening today, it's no coincidence to me, of course, or you, that the Iranians decide, maybe trying to snatch an American flagged or a not, it wouldn't be an American flag, but a Panamanian flagged, for example, tanker connected to the American economy wouldn't be so smart. We'll go after the Brits instead. Clever by them.
Yeah, exactly. So there's several good reasons why you try to first disrupt your main opponent from his alliances. You see, this is a key strategy, which an ancient Chinese philosopher named Sun Tzu once talked about. He says, the first thing you do is you break up, attack the enemy strategy. The second thing you do is you break up his alliances. Well, if they attack the British and we say, well, it doesn't bother us at all and we don't mind, then the British and the Americans suddenly have more distance between each other. So President Trump was very careful to say that England is one of our closest allies. We have arrangements with them, and we're going to look at this very seriously. So there's going to be an interesting development in the next week and the next 15 days on how this plays out. Now, quite frankly, the Iranians, by what they've done, have really played into our hands, which is pretty interesting. Again, you have to think about this in the second, third, and fourth order moves. Imagine playing three-dimensional chess. If you can remember that three-dimensional chess game from Star Trek. Imagine playing that, and now you have to move 3 moves ahead. Now the Iranians have just taken a British tanker. It's a British flagged tanker, and I don't even know how many British sailors are on there, probably very few. And, of course, the British seized an Iranian tanker a couple of weeks ago near the Straits of Gibraltar. So this is a kind of a tit-for-tat kind of situation where the Iranians are saying it's reciprocal. But what they've done is they've now alarmed England and the EU. Now, although England is going through a Brexit, and I know this is, there's a lot of complicated thought here, we're moving England out of the European Union, the French and everyone else are still very concerned. Most of the oil that comes through the Straits of Hormuz today doesn't come to the United States. In fact, I don't think hardly any of it does. Most of it goes to Europe and China. So those are the two places that are right now worried about the Straits of Hormuz being closed off by the Iranians. And the Iranians could do so if they wanted to. But if they do, that is a cause for war, because that is something that the international community will not allow. And the Iranians would find themselves at the bad end of an alliance of a lot of different countries saying you can't do that. So the Iranians are trying to play underneath that threshold to show that they're unhappy with the sanctions that are being waged against them, and they're trying to get that as a negotiation chip. The other thing that people may not be aware of is that right now we're in negotiations with the Iranians over the entire nuclear deal. So this is another movement on the chessboard that says, oh, we've got this extra piece now, and how can we use that to their advantage? So the Iranians are clever chess players, but I think they've actually overplayed their hand at this point, and they're getting desperate.
Colonel John Antal is with us. I want to remind you again to get to his website and use it the way that we do, and love to use it, American-leadership.com. And there you see the books that I've read, that I have in my library, and in fact in studio. Sir, when you look at the movement of the Iranians today, you noted in the last segment that they successfully killed a bunch of our young men and women.
Yes.
Over the last really the last 15 years or so, I would guess, maybe slightly more than that. And they're not sympathetic figures on the international stage, which, to your point, makes me wonder why they would press this hard right now, because it just doesn't seem to be smart. They were already negotiating over the nuclear deal that President Trump spiked. President Trump has shown himself to be has shown significant restraint, militarily speaking, with the Chinese, with the Russians, with the Iranians. Why would they press this hard right now? It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, they're in very dire straits right now financially. Their economy is in the tank. Their money has been greatly inflated. They've been putting all of the money. We gave them, over $1.7 billion in cash just so they would be nice to us, and they used almost all of that for terrorism. So the whole Obama administration paying off the Barbary pirates, as we used to say, paying off the terrorists didn't work. Because what happened was they used that money to fuel Hezbollah, which is against Israel. They used that money to wage war in Syria. They used that money to wage war in Yemen. And, of course, they're making all of our allies, very uncomfortable there and killing them. I mean, there's attacks against the Saudi Arabian pipelines almost every day by drones and other things. So the Iranians are trying to up the pressure against America's allies. And the allies are saying, hey, you got to do something. And we're saying, well, we collectively need to do something. But right now they're in a situation where they're hurting and they want that pain to lessen. And they believe that if they just snarl and bite and make a lot of noise, that we'll pay attention to them more and that we'll suddenly cave in and give them more money. They're used to this from American presidents. I mean, ever since Ronald Reagan was president, you may remember that the Iranian hostages were taken under President Carter. And the day that President Reagan became president, a message was sent to the Iranians, and that day they let go of all of our hostages. So that was kind of amazing. And then from then on, we had these consistent problems with them. So, their regime believes that America is the great, evil, that they always chant death to America. And, of course, they hate Israel. So this is where they get their power from because they're able to focus their people on an external threat. Iran is a great country. It has always been a place of amazing civilization in the history of mankind. The Iranian people are really good people in many cases. Many of us, know Iranian Americans who are just wonderful folks and great entrepreneurs. But the people of Iran right now are captured by this theocracy and they can't break out. There's no way for them to break out of it because if they say that they're not with it, they're considered then no longer going to be able to have a pathway to heaven. They're not going to be able to be part of the culture. So it is a tremendous challenge for us to play the difficult game of international politics, realpolitik, if you will, being able to clearly see how to use military force and how to not go too far.
Colonel John Antal is with us again, an expert in leadership, U.S. combat veteran, tanker, served in a variety of positions, and a historian as well. I'm going to ask him to stay with us. Sir, are you good on time? Can you stay with us for one more second?
I sure am. I'm happy to stay with you, Jeff. Anything for you.
I want to do that because one of the things that I want to do is I want to grab you before the end of the program. We got to talk about Apollo 11. Because,
outstanding.
Right, of the just extraordinary feat that Apollo 11 represents, and in fact, if you look at what we're trying to do right now with our space program, we're doing that in a time of significant racial division, a lot of at least near wars around the world, and I just find some of the historical perspective, 50 years on, sir, to be straight out of Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the
amazing.
sun.
It truly is. And I'll tell you what,
is.
We were so close to risking everything there. Such courage, not only of the astronauts, but of the entire, America, the political establishment. How many presidents today are willing to risk the thought that we send someone to the moon and they die there?
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. So I want to get to some of that, and I want to wrap up with Iran. So we'll do that. Those of you that are on hold, I'll do my best to get to your calls before the end of the program. But we want to continue our conversation next here with Colonel John Antal. Remember, American-leadership.com is the website where you can go get his books and learn more about him. And we'll continue our conversation with him next here on 1210 WPHT. Jeff Bolton with you here on 1210 WPHT. The Iranians have seized a British-flagged oil tanker that was transiting through the Strait of Hormuz, headed for Saudi Arabia. The Saudis, of course, have taken significant action in recent years to try to limit the power of the Iranians. As our guest, Colonel John Antal, notes, we also have this situation where we have a president, it's the first president we've certainly had in a while, that is exceedingly cautious with regard to using military force. To me, that's smart. I support it. I think, Colonel Antal, one of the things that I have enjoyed about use of the military has been his lack of use of the military. We've clearly needed to get healed up across all the services with regards to people and equipment, and that seems to be taking place. In my observation and my travels, I've flown the KC-1, I flew the KC-135, as a matter of fact, or out at Topeka, Kansas. Flew the B-52 recently, and those communities are all getting healthier because they're not being used in war. And I keep circling back to there's an awful lot of brush fires we could stomp out with our military around the world, and this is kind of one of them. But, man, that's not what we need to be doing right now.
No, that's exactly right. The military is a blunt instrument. When you use it, you're going to break things, kill people, and there are second and third and fourth order consequences. President Trump has been very wise so far in using the military very much as a political tool to get different people to stop fighting or to diminish the fighting or to keep our presence in an area that is needed. For instance, he's working hard right now to try to bring peace to Afghanistan. Eventually we need to have a solution to Afghanistan that is political, and we need to get out. Because what happens in Afghanistan is not going to make – it is not a national security interest that is worth spending more treasure for and more people for. Now, we don't want terrorism there, and we know that the 911, guys trained there, so we want to keep an eye on that. But we can do that with small forces. We have small forces in Syria and Iraq now, and people don't even really know about them. And what they're doing is they're keeping a lid on ISIS, and we've taken ISIS out of the picture, at least geographically. They'll never be out of the picture totally because they're an idea, but we've done some great work there. We are also moving, strongly in Europe to show Putin that if he was to try to attack Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, some of these countries that we now have as NATO allies, and we're committed to defend them, that we would not be happy and that we'd have people there and we could make a difference. So he's doing some very important things that keep us from having wars. And in Iran, what he's doing is he's putting enough military force there to say, look, we don't want a war. But if you start one, we will finish it. And what will happen then is we'll have an air and naval fight against them to damage and to punish their country. We won't try to invade and take over unless we go insane. And I don't think that will happen. So I think that we want to minimize the possibility of the use of force against the Iranians unless they go out and just do what they tried to do before. Don't forget that under the Obama administration, they took one of our ships, put our sailors on their knees, handcuffed them all, and held them,
right,
and finally released them. We didn't go to war over that, and that was an amazing opportunity for the Iranians to beat their chest and show the world how impotent the United States of America was. And when you do that, it just makes them stronger. So we've pushed back hard on that, and I think that if people were to look clearly at what's happening and understand the geopolitical movements that are being made, they'd be very proud of what we're doing right now.
It causes me to jump over to another larger point, which goes back to Russia. And of course, every time we talk, we're always going to get to China. The idea that the just general instability in the world is good for Russia, it's good for China, it's good for Iran. Is that some of that these days, sir, not mitigated by the fact that we have become much more energy dominant than we once were, and we frankly don't need the Middle East and its petroleum products to the extent that we once did?
Right. Well, the energy dominance of America is a great thing for the world, because what happens is that if you look at the dictatorships of the world, most of them are fueled, particularly in Russia and other places, by oil, by concentrated wealth. Concentrated wealth brings about dictatorship. Now, in the United States, we have the great shale revolution, which has caused us to be the greatest producer of oil now and probably for the next 20 years. So this gives us a great opportunity for all of those who are worried about us not being green. This gives us a great opportunity for the next 20 years to develop the systems that will actually work, because the wind power doesn't really work and the solar power doesn't really work. It can't meet all our needs, but eventually we'll have other things, possibly fusion, who knows. But we need about a 20-year span, and America has that now, and it's amazing. Plus, we can look across the world, and we can talk to people in Europe and say, well, if you can't get your oil from that dictator Putin, we may be able to provide it. So it's a good thing because it opens up the market and it allows freedom to be more possible. But when you look at Russia, for instance, Russia is in a very sad situation in the sense that they're not communists anymore, but they're totally totalitarian. Putin has the ability to kill, imprison, do whatever he wants to anyone he wants. And he is so angry at the United States for the collapse of the Soviet Union, and so many other Russians are so shamed by what they feel was the great loss of Russian prestige and power because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, that they're looking for an opportunity to get back. What you're going to see in the months ahead is major problems in Georgia and the Caucasus. And then you might see some problems in Moldova. And then you might see some problems with Russia against Sweden because Sweden's not a NATO ally. So all of these places are right now percolating and bubbling, and I'm keeping an eye on it, and many other folks are too. But this is the world we live in. And so we've got to figure out ways to bring these folks to the table and get them to look at the world differently, and that's very hard.
Sir, so it is very hard, and yet we've seen an enormous change in the White House with regards to military policy. You know, everybody thought this president, remember how they said he was going to be reckless and he was going to get us into a nuclear war, and oh my God, he's got his finger on the button. The language that came out before his election and then after his election was extraordinary. But yes, he's turned out to be the opposite guy.
Well, it's interesting.
A change we thought we'd never see, right?
That's right. Words and actions, Now, his words aren't contrary to his actions, but his words set up the situation for negotiation. And then the other side says, oh, my God, this guy might be so crazy, I better deal with him. Because American presidents are normally very cautious and very risk adverse, and they'll never say bad things, and they don't want to offend anyone, and hum all this on and on and on, so we can push them around. Well, they can't do that with Trump. They don't know what he's going to do. But when you look at his actions have been actually very well measured. We are now talking with North Korea. North Korea is not shooting missiles over Japan and has not had a nuclear test since then. Has he accomplished peace on Earth? No, but you can't do it in a week. So we're moving toward, these situations. We have to solve the North Korean situation, which is truly a China situation, which then gets you involved into the tariffs against China. Why is he doing the tariffs against China? Because if we don't do the tariffs against China, the imbalance will totally bankrupt the United States and will ruin our chances for long-term freedom of a republic, because we have to be able to have a level playing field with trading partners overseas. So he's doing that. You're looking at Venezuela where people are crying out for freedom, but they can't seem to get there because the other guy's got all the guns. But we haven't stormed in there with the Marines, have we? So we're going to see what happens. That's going to develop. The Venezuelan dictators' days are numbered, but dictators can stay in power for a long time. So we really got to keep up the smart pressure here. But what he's doing is using what many people a decade ago would call smart power. In other words, you don't go out and shoot everything. What you do is you posture. What you do is you position. What you do is you say, look, we could do this. I have a bigger button than you do. And they realize that you really do, And then you show a willingness to use it, but you shy, a little bit, short of that, just as he did when the drone was shot down. Now, just so everybody will know, we've had drones and reconnaissance aircraft shot down over enemy countries ever since the end of World War II, about 47 of them to be exact. And some of them have been captured in enemy territory and all these other things, and we've never gone to war over them. So for those who said we should have gone to war over the drone, they really need to think what going to war means.
Right.
As a soldier, I want to avoid wars. My job is to keep the Republic safe and to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where we waste our treasure and our precious blood and everything else over causes that don't make a difference. Right now, Iran is not our major threat. Now, they're not our friends. They're definitely an enemy. They've definitely killed Americans, but they're not our major threat. What we have to do is keep our eye focused on our two major adversaries, not yet enemies, but adversaries, which are Russia and China, because their goals are antithetical to ours, and that's what makes you an adversary. So we have friends, we have allies, we have friends, we have competitors, we have adversaries, and we have enemies. And right now Iran is pretty much almost in the enemy's block, but we haven't had to break the threshold and actually go into a shooting war. But if they were to do something like an attack an American ship, launch all their missiles one day at every American ship they could find, try to, create mass casualties in a terrorist attack in the United States or something, well, then the whole situation would change. And they know that, and they know that Trump is the president.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, sir, let's do this. Quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk Apollo, kind of against the backdrop of where we sit today. Colonel John Antal with us on the program. As you all know, he's my go-to guy when we're talking about things that are important with regard to our nation. I want to send you again to his website, American-leadership.com. You can see his books there, also how to buy those and learn the same things and the same leadership lessons that I read routinely when I'm not talking with him. We'll continue our conversation with him next right here on 1210 WPHT. Jeff Bolton with you here on 1210 WPHT. My friend Colonel John Antal is with us. I wanted to pull him in to talk about Iran and some of the geopolitical stuff we've been dealing with lately. We've gotten to do that. But I also want to cover the Apollo program. As a boy, I do specifically remember sitting down in front of the television and seeing the Apollo landings, being mesmerized by it then and now. Have done an enormous amount of reading in my life about the space program. I don't know how many books I have ended up reading over time. It's been an extraordinary number, that I know. Sir, when I look at the influence of Apollo and how we were pressing in that program in the middle of incredible both national and international strife, I don't know. It says something about our character or our heart or our guts. I don't know exactly what it is, but we have, when we choose to use it, an enormous constitution in this nation. And the risks that we took in Apollo, unless you've done the reading as you've done and I've done in depth, it's impossible to understand the depth of the risk that we took, particularly with Apollo 8. And the things that we did, they were just, larger than life.
No, it's truly amazing. Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. We took the tremendous decision to be courageous. We decided that we were going to go to the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. We decided to go to the moon because we were in a race against the Soviet Union, and we wanted to show that the idea of freedom and liberty could advance in the scientific fields as much as autocracy and totalitarianism could. And we were able to beat them at their game. We took tremendous risks. We lost people in this, in the space race. We had 3 astronauts killed as we were developing technology, to get to the moon. And then when you look at the lunar lander, if you ever have a chance to actually look at a model of the lunar lander, it is a Coke can with a couple of legs and some aluminum foil on it. It is absolutely amazing how much courage we had to send those people up in that kind of circumstance. We didn't have some of the things we have today, and most people realize this, but the computing power that we had in that time, electronic, was about equal to what you get in a greeting card today. It wasn't much more than 16K. Now, when you think about that, that means they were doing the math. They were doing it on paper. They were using slide rules. I know that's ancient history, but they were actually using devices and their brains in ways that got us there. And we did it more than once. That's the tremendous thing about it. We landed on the moon several times, and we were able to show the world that we could do it. And the political risk was huge. Now, President Nixon actually had a letter written that he was going to read if the astronauts failed, if, in fact, they crashed and died, or if they got up there and couldn't get off, which was a huge possibility. Imagine if they had landed and they couldn't get off, and now it's just hours until they die. Because they only have so much oxygen. It might have been a day, it might have been 2 days, but we couldn't have done anything to save them. We knew this, and yet we did it. And see, that's the kind of thing that inspired you and inspired me and a whole generation of people to say, you can do anything. You can do absolutely anything if you focus, put your heart into it, and have courage.
We did that, and we did it amidst – and people forget this. if you were to look back at the 60s as we were flying to the moon, attempting to land on the moon after President Kennedy, of course, he was assassinated in 63. He had already made the call and the challenge to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth. Then he was assassinated, and we decided that we were going to get it done. It's difficult to not fully understand the upheaval that we were under in this country, racially and otherwise. I mean, it was in Vietnam War. The racial strife, it was incredible.
War was going on. The Vietnam War was at the height of it. We just finished in '68 the Tet Offensive, which was a tactical victory for the ARVN, for the Republic of South Vietnam, and for the U.S. Army and for the U.S. USA. But it was a strategic defeat because it showed that the communists could do anything they wanted in Vietnam. And so the war started to really tip against us, the political feeling in the United States after '68. And so here we are in a very divisive time, and yet we're marching forward. And that's what you have to do. America's not perfect. America will never get everything perfect, but America is a self-adjusting system. We fix things. We figure out what's wrong, and we move on. We determine where the problems are, and we try to get them. We see the possibilities, and we go to the moon. I mean, imagine this. The saddest thing is that it's been 50 years. We should be back up there.
We should be back up there, and we are going to get there by hook or by crook. Now we have the moguls that are taking over, and I'm encouraged by it. I really am. I want to see us. I want to see us charge again and have things that we do that make us proud to be Americans, and not spend all the time that we do ripping each other apart. Just after a while gets to be exhausting.
Well, one of the things that all Americans need to think about is that we have many things that we can argue about, many things that can divide us. But what about if we all thought about trying to have intentional unity? Intentional unity. This is a thought. I'm going to get along with people today. Today I'm going to talk with someone. They're going to bring up a different political view, and I'm going to say, that's what makes America great. We can both have different, views on things. And we decide those at the ballot box. We don't have riots and burn down buildings and beat people up in the streets. We actually do this at the ballot box because that's what makes America different than the rest of the world. And yes, we have problems at the ballot box. Some people say that they're not, that we have problems with voting and all the other things. And yes, we do. But we are a self-adjusting system. We can, in fact, improve. And we have the greatest opportunity to improve here than any place else. Because in America, you have freedom of opportunity. Freedom of opportunity.
Yeah, well said. Sir, thank you. Colonel John Antal, our guest here. Remember, go to American-leadership.com to learn more about him. And everybody be careful out there. 107 right now is what it feels like in Philly. I'm Jeff Bolton on 1210 WPHT.